Estate planning again. Hi everybody, it's Dennis LaVoy with Telos Financial, Michigan's financial advisor for young professionals and their families. Thanks for checking out the video today. Today I am joined by my friend Sarah Prosser with the Mitzel Law Group from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
As Dennis said, my name is Sarah. I am an attorney at the Mitzel Law Group in Ann Arbor. I am licensed not only in Michigan but also in Florida, and my practice is primarily focused on estate planning. So we're going to talk about that today.
All right. So today we're going to talk a little bit about trusts and some different uses for trusts. So Sarah, what is a trust?
The most common misconception that I hear about trusts is that they're only for wealthy people. That's entirely wrong. I would say 9 out of 10 times with clients we're using trusts. Most people, when they think about estate planning, think of a will. And a trust and a will are very similar in that their main function is to take your assets and to name beneficiaries who will receive those assets at your death. But the difference is that a trust is kind of like a business or a corporation where you're actually going to put your assets into it during your lifetime. So the trust becomes the legal owner of your assets, versus a will doesn't really come into play until your death, and it just tells who's going to get your stuff. A trust, too, is perpetual in its existence. It doesn't terminate until it's emptied out of your assets, which means that when you die, your trust is going to keep living. That means that you name a successor trustee who will take over at your death, and everything will seamlessly keep going. Those are kind of the main differences between a trust and a will.
So there's obviously a lot involved in a trust, and you'd need an attorney to get a trust involved, right? It's not something somebody can do at home on their own.
Right, that's correct. You need to meet with an estate planning attorney who's familiar with this and can draft the documents. It's definitely not something that you can do on your own.
Yeah, and then it's also state specific as well, right? You can't just, you're licensed in multiple states, but an attorney in Michigan wouldn't draft a trust for Texas, right?
Yeah.
Unless they were barred in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously there's a lot of different uses for trusts and different purposes for those. So what are some different purposes you see trusts used for?
One of the main ones is that it avoids probate. People think that if they create a will that they're not going to have to go through the probate process. And what probate is you go to the courthouse and the court then administers your estate. That's not true. A will basically is just overriding the statute. So you still have to go through probate, which can be very expensive and very lengthy. Probate often runs between $3,000 and $5,000, and people are really unaware of that. With a trust, you're not going through probate. Like I said, you're putting your assets into the trust, so at your death, the trust keeps continuing on, successor trustee takes over, and there's really no need to go to court unless you forget to fund the trust with something, in which case you'll have to go to court and probate that. But if it's done properly, we avoid that, and everything is funded during life.
That's interesting. So aside from avoiding probate, what other uses do you generally see trusts?
Another way that you can use trusts is that you can set up either a joint trust, which is where if there's a married couple, they both have one trust that they're using together, but we can also do separate trusts, so each spouse has their own. And the reason that you would do that is for second marriages. That's more common these days, either because of divorce and remarriage, or when a spouse dies and then the surviving spouse gets remarried. And the reason that you would use 2 separate trusts is that you can then segregate assets and make sure that if you have children, that your assets would be going to those children instead of accidentally disinheriting them because of a second marriage. Another reason that we would use 2 separate trusts is that if you have a married couple and one of them is in a high-risk profession, such as a doctor or an attorney like myself, who are subject to getting sued for malpractice, you can then move assets into the trust of the non-high-risk spouse, and that way you're making sure that your things are safe.
That's great. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, obviously. I see trust used pretty commonly, but it's nice to see different uses, I guess, for them. Typically, I just see the joint most commonly. I guess are there other considerations people need to keep in mind if they're looking for a trust, or if they think a trust might be appropriate for them?
Yeah, I think normally outside of the second marriage, the high risk, when people are using trusts, a great use of them is when you have kids. So the provisions that you can stick into a trust for kids is you can really control how they would receive assets at your death. A common provision is that before a child turns 30 years old. It's really just there to help with support, maintenance, get them through school, maybe a down payment on a house. And then once they hit 30, which is kind of the responsible age, is what we say, then you start giving them income and maybe principal, and then it will be distributed over time. It encourages your kids to become responsible adults and not live off of a trust. So that's a great thing. And the difference between that and a will is because you can put that language in a will, but it's going to be court supervised if you have minor children, whereas a trust, if you have provisions in there for minor children, the trustee is just going to oversee that. And so again, you're not dealing with the court process, which is timely and expensive.
And then typically with a trust, you wouldn't use it as a standalone document, right? You would use it as a part of a packet for an estate planning packet, where you would also have a will and you would have these other associated documents, right?
Right. When you have a trust, you still have a will. It's just a little bit different. It's called a pour-over will, and all that the will says is if I miss putting anything into my trust, it's going into my trust. And so it's kind of there as a safety net to just catch any assets. But Dennis is right. You also need patient advocate designation, durable power of attorney, funeral representative designation is also new in Michigan. And then we go through the trust funding process as well. So it's a whole estate planning package. The trust just isn't standing by itself.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned it earlier, but a trust is not just for wealthy. Really, it can be used for pretty much anybody would be beneficial for their estate, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is that people just have this conception that it is for wealthy individuals, which is true. And those tend to be more complicated trusts. But for the average family, I think trust is a highly beneficial way to help achieve your estate planning goals.
Yeah, cool. Well, anything else about trusts we should know?
I think we covered the basics. If you have any questions, though, feel free to ask me.
All right. Well, thank you for taking the time to watch. Again, I'm Dennis LaVoy with Telos Financial. Thanks, Sarah, for coming to visit today. And if you think a trust or a will might be helpful for you, contact Sarah with the Mitzel Law Group. See you next time.